The HOA president stood on my grandmother's porch, waving eviction papers like a royal decree. Her designer perfume mixed with the scent of pine and lake water, a reminder of how out of place she was here. Brina Caldwell, that name alone could curdle milk. She smiled the kind of smile you only see on people who believe rules don't apply to them. "Mr. Thompson," she began, voice sharp enough to cut glass, "you have 72 hours to vacate this structure." She looked around at the handcrafted cedar walls like they offended her sense of symmetry. "This violates at least 6 community standards." I blinked, half amused, half stunned. "Community standards?" I asked. "Lady, my family built this place before your community existed." She didn't flinch. "That doesn't change the fact that this," she gestured toward my grandmother's cabin, "is an eyesore bringing down property values." I wanted to laugh, but my throat burned with anger instead. This cabin wasn't an eyesore. It was a legacy. My grandmother's hand-carved railings, the scent of cedar soaked into every board, the echo of generations who'd watched the sun rise over the same lake. Brina adjusted her pearls and continued like she was reading a script. "Failure to comply will result in legal action by the Lakeshore Estates Homeowners Association." She said it as if she were announcing a death sentence. I took the papers, glanced at the seal, then handed them back. "You might want to do a little homework before you threaten people, Mrs. Caldwell." Her eyes narrowed, but I could see the confusion flicker behind them. "Excuse me?" "You're standing on my property," I said quietly. "Every inch of this porch, every tree you're looking at, every wave hitting that dock, it all belongs to me." She scoffed, stepping closer. "Not for long," she hissed, then turned on her heels. The sharp click of her heels echoing down my grandmother's old steps like a countdown. I watched her drive off in her spotless BMW. Tires crunching gravel that funny enough, she didn't realize wasn't her road to drive on. That was the moment I decided. She wanted a war. And she just declared it on the wrong battlefield. When Brina's car disappeared around the bend, the world went quiet again. Just wind, pines, and the slow lap of water against the dock. The same rhythm I'd heard since childhood, sitting beside my grandmother on these weathered boards. She used to hum old country hymns while gutting fish, her hands moving with a grace born of repetition. "This place may not look like much, Ezra," she'd tell me, "but it's where life still remembers how to breathe." After my divorce and the collapse of my consulting firm, I came back here because I didn't know where else to go. My city life had become noise. Schedules, deadlines, people pretending their glass offices meant something. When I unlocked this cabin again, dust motes swirling in the sunlight like tiny ghosts, I felt peace for the first time in years. The world outside could keep its meetings and mortgages. I had this: pine, water, and memory. Grandma Opal built this cabin with my grandfather back in 1963, when this lake was just another patch of wild land surrounded by silence. Every plank was cut from local cedar, every nail hammered by hand. They raised my father here, and later I learned to swim, to fish, and to tell the difference between a sunrise worth waking up for and a life worth fighting for. She used to joke about it, calling it her worthless swampland. Whenever she said that, she'd wink like she knew a secret. I'd laugh, assuming it was her way of being modest. Turns out my grandmother was playing chess while everyone else was still learning checkers. When she passed at 91, the cabin came to me, along with a box of her old letters and deeds tied up with faded string. At the time, I didn't bother reading them. I thought inheritance just meant memories. I didn't realize it also meant responsibility and leverage. The first few months here were heaven. I'd wake at dawn, drink black coffee on the porch, and watch the fog lift off the water like a curtain revealing another perfect day. Loons called across the lake, their cries echoing like something prehistoric. Every evening, I'd sit on the dock, barefoot, watching the water catch the colors of sunset until it burned gold. Then came the construction. The sound of saws and concrete mixers replaced birdsong. Developers arrived, carving the forest into tidy rectangles. 47 luxury homes sprouted around the lake like weeds after rain. Overnight, the silence was gone, replaced by lawnmowers, gossip, and people who measured peace and property values. Most of them were decent enough. Families chasing the same tranquility I'd found. But every colony gets its queen, and ours wore designer sunglasses and a permanent sneer. Brina Caldwell, The woman who'd just tried to erase my grandmother's legacy had moved in with a mission: control everything that touched her view. When she first waved from her shiny BMW, I thought she was just being polite. I didn't realize I was shaking hands with the storm that would change everything. That night, sitting by the fire with a glass of whiskey and the echo of her threat still ringing in my head, I pulled out Grandma's old box of papers for the first time. On top was her handwriting, neat and looping. Ezra, some people only see land. Others see history. Know which one you own. I didn't know it yet, but that line would become my battle cry. It didn't take long for Brina to turn our peaceful lakeshore into her personal kingdom. Within 3 months of moving in, she'd convinced half the newcomers that her rules were community improvements. She started small. That's how all dictators do it. First, she demanded everyone repaint their mailboxes coordinated beige. Then, she banned fishing from private docks because, as she put it ruins the waterfront aesthetic. At first, most of us just rolled our eyes. The retired Kowalskis across the lake laughed when she sent them their first courtesy violation notice for their garden gnomes. "I've had those since '74, Mr. Kowalski said, chuckling. "If she touches them, I'll glue one to her driveway." But then the fines started coming. Real ones. $300 for non-compliant exterior colors. $50 a day for unauthorized lawn decor. People paid because they didn't want trouble. Brina knew exactly what she was doing. Bully one person, silence 10. Soon, the whole neighborhood was walking on eggshells. Folks started whispering her name like she was the devil herself. You could hear the sound of her designer heels echoing on the pavement before she even appeared. That sharp click, click, click became our warning siren. When she came for me, it wasn't about rules. It was about power. She called my cabin an architectural blight and claimed it decreased community property values. Never mind that my family had owned this land for decades before her HOA ever existed. She didn't care about history, just control. It started with letters, stuffed in my mailbox in neat white envelopes bearing her signature. Notice of violation. Mandatory compliance request. Final warning. Each one thicker and nastier than the last. She fined me for using unapproved materials, meaning cedar wood instead of beige vinyl siding. Then she accused me of operating a commercial business because I had solar panels on my roof. Every time a letter arrived, I tossed it straight into the fireplace. Watching her threats curl into smoke was the most satisfying part of my day, but Brina didn't stop. She doubled down. One morning, I woke up to find a bright orange notice stapled to my fence. Eviction imminent, unauthorized structure. Imagine that, being told to leave your own home because it doesn't match someone else's dream of perfection. I tried to reason with a few of the neighbors, the decent ones who used to wave when they passed by. Most just looked away. "We're sorry, Ezra," one whispered. "She's intense." They were scared. She'd made examples out of anyone who stood up to her, and then came her little entourage, clipboard carriers, who called themselves the Compliance Committee. They'd wander by taking photos of my cabin like paparazzi documenting a crime scene. For a while, I ignored it. I told myself she'd get bored and move on. But when the certified letter arrived, an official 72-hour eviction notice, I realized this wasn't just bullying. It was war. That night, sitting by the fire, I looked out over the moonlit lake and heard Grandma's voice in my head again. Know which one you own. I didn't know what that meant yet. But I was about to find out. Because what Brina didn't realize was that the very ground she walked on, the gravel she parked her BMW on, the water her HOA claimed as community property, none of it actually belonged to her, and I was about to prove it. The morning after that eviction notice, I brewed my coffee a little stronger. The air outside was sharp, the kind that smelled like rain and revenge. Across the lake, Brina's perfect house gleamed white and smug in the sunlight. Her BMW sat parked near the water, right in that gravel lot everyone used as the community parking area. I couldn't help but grin. Something about her confidence made me curious. My grandmother used to say, "Bullies never check the paperwork." Maybe it was time I did, so I grabbed the dusty deed box she'd left me, the one I'd never bothered opening. Inside were yellowed papers, maps, and a handwritten note that read, "Property Survey, 1962. The paper was fragile, ink faded, but I could still make out the name Harrison Pike stamped in the corner. That sounded official enough. An hour later, I was in the basement of the county courthouse, surrounded by the smell of old paper and government neglect. The filing clerk, Dorothy, looked like she'd been working there since the Nixon years, and I mean that as a compliment. "Looking for something special, hun?" she asked, peering over her glasses. "I'm trying to confirm property boundaries on a family cabin," I said. "There's been a dispute." Dorothy smiled knowingly. "Let me guess. HOA trouble? You have no idea." She led me through aisles of filing cabinets older than time itself. "Most folks never read past their tax records," she said, sliding open a drawer with practiced ease. "But these old waterfront parcels? They've got stories." She pulled a thick folder from a shelf, dust puffing into the air like history exhaling. "Here's your lot number." Her finger traced a faint survey map. "Interesting. Your boundary line goes a lot farther east than what's on modern tax maps." "How much farther?" I asked, leaning closer. Dorothy squinted at the map. "About 200 feet. Right up to the edge of that gravel area by the lake." I froze. "The parking lot?" She nodded. "If that's what they're using it for, then yes, sugar. According to this, it's part of your deeded property." I stared at the faded lines on that map like they were treasure routes. My pulse kicked. 200 feet east. The entire parking lot, the same one the HOA maintained, paved and claimed as their own, sat right on my family's land. Every car parked there, every resident who came to the lake, every one of them had been trespassing for years. But that wasn't all. At the bottom of the document, in small handwritten text, was something I'd never noticed before. "Includes riparian water rights as established under the Homestead Patent of 1891. I turned to Dorothy. "What does that mean exactly?" She smiled like someone who'd just watched the underdog discover the winning move. "It means, dear, that your family doesn't just own the shore. You own the water access, possibly even the lake bed itself, depending on how the plat was recorded." "That's rare." "And very valuable." Her words hit like lightning. Not only had Brina been threatening to evict me from my own property, she'd been charging people to use land and water that legally belonged to me. I made a dozen photocopies of every relevant page, my hands shaking from equal parts rage and adrenaline. For the first time in months, I felt something stronger than anger. I felt power. On my way home, I stopped by my Uncle Morris's office. He'd practiced real estate law for 40 years before retiring, and if anyone could make sense of this mess, it was him. He laid out the documents across his mahogany desk, adjusting his glasses like a general studying a battle map. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, tapping the boundary lines. "Your grandmother was brilliant. These rights are rock solid. Ezra, your problem isn't that the HOA wants to evict you. Your problem is that they've been illegally using your land." I laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd had in months. "So what do I do?" Uncle Morris leaned back, eyes glinting. "You get a surveyor to confirm everything. Then you sit tight." "Why?" He smiled. "Because, my boy, they think you're a trespasser. But soon, you'll be the landlord." And just like that, the game changed. By the time I left Uncle Morris's office, the sky had turned the color of burnt copper. I sat in my truck staring at those photocopied maps spread across the passenger seat. Every legal line, every faded signature confirmed what Dorothy had said. That parking lot and a good portion of the lake belonged to me. For months, Brina had paraded around like a queen with a clipboard, threatening me with her HOA authority. Now I was the one holding the crown, and she didn't even know it. But Morris was right. Before I went to war, I needed proof no one could dispute. The next morning, I called Dylan Pike, the son of the original surveyor listed on Grandma's map. He sounded skeptical at first until I mentioned the name Opal Thompson. There was a long pause on the line, then a chuckle. "Your grandmother? My dad used to say she was sharper than the tax assessor. Yeah, I'll bring my equipment tomorrow." When he arrived, Dylan looked like the kind of guy who could measure a fence post to the millimeter without a calculator. He set up his high-tech gear, drones, GPS rods, sensors that beeped like something from a NASA mission. I followed him around, watching as the digital map of my property came to life on his tablet. After 2 hours of scanning, Dylan gave a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. The old survey was right. That gravel parking lot, yours went all the way to the drainage ditch, and the boundary line goes 20 feet into the lake. Your family's water rights are legit. I felt a rush of triumph so strong it almost made me dizzy. So all those cars? Yep, every one of them parked on private land. And those docks? Sitting in your water. I could already picture Brina's face when she realized her empire was built on trespassing. That evening, I drove back to Uncle Morris's place. His home office still smelled like old law books and coffee strong enough to melt paint. When I spread Dylan's updated survey on his desk, Morris let out a long, satisfied whistle. Ezra, this isn't just good news. This is a legal gold mine. How so? I asked. He leaned back, eyes gleaming like a chess master about to checkmate. Because they've been using your property without consent, collecting fees from it, and enforcing rules they had no right to impose. That's not just civil trespass, that's potentially fraud. The word fraud felt electric. So what's the next move? Morris's grin widened. Documentation, evidence, witnesses. We don't go in with anger, we go in with facts. Let her hang herself with her own rules. He handed me a yellow legal pad and started rattling off a list. Take photos of the parking lot with license plates visible. Gather copies of HOA newsletters mentioning community amenities. Record any future interactions with Brina or her committee. Stay polite. Always polite, she'll expect you to fight dirty, he said. That's when you fight smart. I spent the next few days quietly preparing. Every time I saw Brina strutting around with her clipboard, I smiled to myself. She thought I was beaten, but I was documenting everything. Late one night, my neighbor Garrett knocked on my door. He was a quiet guy, ex-military, the type who noticed things. You're not the only one she's been screwing over, he said, dropping a folder on my table. Inside were copies of HOA financial records, screenshots, and even voice memos of Brina threatening residents. Been keeping track, he said simply. Figured you might make better use of this than I could. I looked at him, then at the folder and smiled. Garrett, my friend, you just became my favorite neighbor. That night, as I filed away every piece of evidence under Grandma's framed photo, I felt her watching over me, proud, amused, maybe a little mischievous. Brina thought she was in control, but I was done playing defense. It was time to flip the board. If there's one thing Brina Caldwell hated more than imperfection, it was losing control. And when she sensed it slipping, she didn't come after me with reason. She came after me with reputation. It started with whispers at the mailbox. Neighbors who used to wave now crossed the street. Someone spray-painted eyesore on my fence one night. I woke up to find it before sunrise, the letters dripping red like fresh blood. I stood there, coffee in hand, and just stared. I wasn't angry, I was impressed. She was escalating faster than I expected. By noon, the neighborhood Facebook group lit up with her manifesto. Protecting our property values, how one man's neglect endangers us all. It had pictures of my cabin, shot from unflattering angles, and captions like, Why Standards Matter. Underneath, she'd written, When one individual refuses to comply, we all suffer. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. The comment section was a battlefield, half of them cheering her on, the other half rolling their eyes or posting popcorn emojis. Still, the damage was done. The story was out, and she was milking it for all it was worth. 2 days later, a local news van rolled into the parking lot. My parking lot, though they didn't know it yet. A young reporter hopped out, all business and bright lipstick. Mr. Thompson, she called, microphone in hand, would you like to comment on claims that your property poses safety concerns to the community? I glanced at the BMW behind her, parked squarely on my land, and smiled. You might want to start your report by telling viewers where you're standing, I said. She blinked. Excuse me? Private property, I said, pointing to the gravel beneath her heels. You and your camera crew are technically trespassing. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Brina, watching from across the lot, turned white as a ghost. The next morning, she doubled down. Her compliance committee started patrolling my driveway, snapping photos every time I stepped outside. They'd log the times I collected mail, the number of guests I had, even the color of my trash bins. It was like living in a bad reality show run by paranoid suburban tyrants. But what Brina didn't know was that every single one of her patrols was caught on my own cameras. Each click of their shutters, each step past my boundary markers, documented, time-stamped, and ready for court. She thought she was tightening the noose. What she didn't realize was that I'd already built the gallows, and when the truth came out, she'd be the one hanging by her own paperwork. A week later, Dylan showed up at my cabin with a flash drive and a grin that said, "Game over." "Got your updated coordinates," he said, setting up his laptop on my kitchen table. "You might want to sit down for this." The 3D map that flickered to life made my heart skip. Bright red lines traced my property boundaries, stretching far beyond what I'd ever imagined. "Your land," Dylan said, pointing to the glowing grid, "covers the entire gravel parking lot and part of the lake bed. About 60% of everything they call community space is technically yours." I blinked, stunned. "And you're absolutely sure?" He chuckled. "GPS doesn't lie. And here's the kicker. Your family's riparian rights cover dock access and the underwater land up to the midpoint of the lake. Legally speaking, every boat moored out there is sitting on your property." For a second, I just stared at him. Then it hit me. The HOA had been collecting monthly boat slip fees and annual lake access dues for property they didn't own. When I told Uncle Morris, he nearly spit out his coffee. "Ezra," he said, laughing in disbelief, "that's not a boundary issue anymore. That's theft. And possibly tax fraud." We spread documents across his desk, tracing decades of paper trails. The HOA had been charging residents hundreds each month for community maintenance and water access. Add it all up. Tens of thousands of dollars siphoned from people who didn't know they were trespassing, Uncle. Morris tapped the papers like a judge delivering a verdict. "We could bury them in court. But I've got a better idea." He leaned forward, eyes glinting. "Let her call a meeting. Let her put on her show. And when the whole neighborhood's watching, you present the truth." I raised an eyebrow. "You want me to ambush her?" "Not ambush, educate," he grinned. "Let's give her a masterclass in property law." That night, I called Garrett to bring the evidence he'd been collecting. He arrived with a cardboard box full of files, spreadsheets, and receipts. "You're not going to believe this," he said, flipping open a folder. "Brina's been listing her BMW lease payments as community transport expenses, and she's been pocketing the difference on every HOA legal fee." I laughed, though it wasn't funny. "So she's been stealing from everyone while pretending to protect them," Garrett nodded. "And they worship her for it." Morris took off his glasses and rubbed his temples. "You've got her cornered 6 ways to Sunday, Ezra. She's been trespassing, embezzling, and extorting." "But you can't just destroy her. You have to win the crowd. The neighbors need to see you as the reasonable one." He was right. If I wanted justice, not chaos, I had to make her defeat undeniable. So we planned it like a heist. Dylan would bring his GPS setup to the meeting, projecting live coordinates. Garrett would document everything on video. Morris would serve as my legal witness, and I'd stand quietly until she'd built her case, then pull the rug from under her in front of everyone. As the sun set that evening, I walked down to the dock. The lake was glassy and calm, like it knew what was coming. The reflection of the moon danced across water that legally belonged to me, water she'd claimed, controlled and profited from. Tomorrow night, she'd stand before the entire community and call me a lawbreaker. Tomorrow night, I'd prove she'd been breaking laws on my land for years. She wanted a stage. I'd give her one. And when the curtain fell, her empire would drown in the lake she never owned. Friday night came dressed in storm clouds. The wind off the lake carried that metallic scent that always shows up before lightning strikes, the kind of air that makes you feel something big is about to happen. The community center parking lot, my parking lot, overflowed with shiny cars, their tires pressed into my gravel like signatures on a confession letter. Through the windows, I could already see the crowd gathering, whispering, nervous. Brina stood at the front in her perfect navy blazer, pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights like battle armor. I walked in quietly, documents tucked under my arm, Uncle Morris beside me, Dylan rolling his GPS case like a scientist heading to an experiment, and Garrett following with a camera slung over his shoulder. Nobody said a word, but the air crackled. Even the sheriff standing in the back to keep the peace looked uneasy. Brina began her performance the moment the clock hit 7. "Good evening, neighbors," she said with that syrupy smile. "We're here tonight to address a matter that threatens the integrity of our community." She clicked a remote, and the projector lit the wall with a slideshow of my cabin. Unflattering angles, shadows, close-ups of cracked wood she'd exaggerated into decay. "As you can see," she continued, "this structure violates multiple safety and aesthetic standards. Despite repeated warnings, Mr. Thompson refuses to comply. The room hummed with murmurs. Some nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably. She pointed a manicured finger in my direction. His actions have reduced property values and endangered our collective investment. Therefore, I move for immediate legal enforcement. For a moment, I let the silence hang, heavy, tense, perfect. Then I stood. Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell, I said evenly. You've worked hard on this presentation. But before we vote on anything, I think everyone deserves to see the full picture. Dylan rolled his GPS monitor to the front, wires humming softly. With a few taps, the map appeared on the wall, a glowing satellite image of the entire neighborhood. He highlighted the boundaries in bright red. According to the county's verified survey, Dylan said, voice steady, this line marks the legal property of Mr. Thompson. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the red outline expanded, cutting straight through the so-called community parking lot, the beach access, and part of the lake. Brina laughed nervously. That's absurd. Those maps are outdated. Actually, Uncle Morris interrupted, his tone calm but sharp, they were confirmed by state-registered surveyors 48 hours ago, and they align perfectly with the original 1962 plat. He handed the sheriff a printed copy. The officer scanned it, then nodded slowly. These look official, I stepped forward. So when you parked your cars tonight, you parked them on my land. The room went dead quiet. Dylan zoomed the map closer. Every vehicle in that lot, including Mrs. Caldwell's BMW, sits fully within Mr. Thompson's property lines. Someone in the back muttered, You've got to be kidding. But I wasn't done. I pulled another folder from my briefcase, photocopies of the water rights documents. And about that beautiful lake we all love, the one the HOA's been charging access fees for. That too falls under my family's private ownership, as confirmed by the State Water Management Office. Dozens of eyes widened. Conversations erupted like firecrackers. I looked directly at Brina. You've been collecting money for dock rentals and lake access for 3 years on water that doesn't belong to you. That's not a community fee. That's illegal profit from private property. Her lawyer fumbled with his papers, face flushing. We were told. By her, Garrett said loudly, stepping forward and pressing play on his recorder. Brina's voice crackled through the speaker. They'll pay whatever I tell them. They don't check paperwork, the crowd erupted. People stood shouting questions. One man turned to his wife, whispering, We've been paying her for our own neighbor's land? The sheriff raised a hand for quiet. Mrs. Caldwell, he said slowly, did you authorize these fees without confirming ownership? Brina stammered, eyes darting. I was only following procedure. Whose procedure? I asked softly. Her silence was answer enough. Then I took a breath and softened my tone. I don't want to punish anyone here. You're all my neighbors. But what's right is right. I propose a fair solution. Legal access for a small, honest fee. No more lies. No more bullying. The crowd shifted again, this time toward me. Heads nodded. Someone started clapping quietly at first, then louder. Brina's shoulders slumped. Her kingdom had fallen, not with a fight, but with facts. As the meeting ended, the sheriff approached me. You handled that well, he said. Could have turned ugly. I glanced out the window at the reflection of the lake under the stormy sky. Truth usually makes enough noise on its own. Outside, thunder rumbled. Brina climbed into her BMW and drove off, tires spinning on gravel she'd never owned. The morning after the meeting felt different. The air was lighter, cleaner, as if the whole lake had exhaled. For the first time in months, no letters were taped to my fence, no cars idled outside my cabin, no cameras pointed toward my porch. Just silence, the kind that feels like freedom. News of the HOA collapse spread faster than wildfire. Half the neighborhood resigned from the association within a week. The other half voted to dissolve it completely. Without Brina's control, the web of lies and fees unraveled overnight. Garrett stopped by a few days later, coffee in hand. You see the news? He asked, grinning. He handed me his phone. A headline read, Former HOA president investigated for fraud and misuse of community funds. Apparently, once the residents compared receipts, the truth spoke for itself. Thousands of dollars unaccounted for, unauthorized payments, even that infamous BMW lease tied back to transport expenses. The county's fraud division didn't take long to connect the dots. When the investigators froze her accounts, Brina tried to sell her lakefront house to cover her debts, but no one wanted to buy from a woman who'd just been exposed as the queen of deception. The for sale sign wilted in the rain like a white flag of surrender. Eventually, she packed up her pearls and left in silence, the empire of beige mailboxes reduced to nothing but memory. Meanwhile, life by the lake slowly healed. The neighbors who once avoided me started waving again. Some even helped repaint my grandmother's porch, volunteering their weekends to restore what she'd built. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very people who'd been forced to pay fake fees were now rebuilding something real. Together. I established a small community fund using voluntary contributions from the parking lot and lake access, transparent, fair and dedicated to maintaining the shoreline. I named it the Opal Trust, after my grandmother. Some evenings, when the sun melts into the water and the loons call across the quiet lake, I think about her. That wink, that mysterious smile. She'd always known the land would protect itself, as long as someone stood up for it. And now, it finally had. In the end, my grandmother didn't just leave me land, she left me leverage. She taught me that truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs proof. The HOA tried to evict me, but all they did was uncover their own lies. So if anyone ever tries to bully you off what's rightfully yours, remember, knowledge is the sharpest weapon. What would you have done in my place? Drop your HOA horror stories in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories where karma finally gets its turn.